Hiya. Welcome to episode 18 of your Human Design Coach podcast, where we look at human design in real life, in application, in action. I'm Ashley Watkins, so excited to be here with you. Your quote for today: rejoicing in ordinary things is not sentimental or trite. It actually takes guts. Each time we drop our complaints and allow everyday good fortune to inspire us, we enter the warrior's world. We can do this even at the most difficult moments. Everything we see, hear, taste, and smell has the power to strengthen and uplift us. And that comes from Pema Chodron. And I did practice how to say her name, and I think I still got it a little wrong, but she's amazing. If you've never read her books, please check those out. So today we are going to look at a human design team reading in action. We're going to be looking at a very special group of people near and dear to my heart. We'll get into that in just a moment. But as we start today, I want to introduce a new little feature. I was listening back to episode 1 the other day and I thought, gosh, I sound so serious. And not that I can't be serious, but I would say it was a little more serious than what I feel like maybe I am in life. Having some time to kind of have some spaciousness between these episodes has given me some time to think about maybe some different things I want to try. So here's one. And these will be fluid. Today, we're going to experiment with Ashley's Beauty Minute. And I'm saying minute because you all know that I can talk, and I want to kind of challenge myself to do this in a minute. You may notice from episode to episode that my hair is on a journey. She's changing. I went gray or started going gray a few years ago, and I've loved it. But I think between that and perimenopause, the texture of my hair continues to change. So I want to share a product with you that I've been using and enjoying. It's called Roz Milk Hair Serum. Here it is. And this is a really nice leave-in cream. I am trying to avoid heat styling. And so this is a cream that you can put in. I've done it on dry hair, on damp hair, and I'm really enjoying it. A leave-in like air dry cream, mixed results. As far as taming the frizz, I've got, some natural curl and wave to my hair, but really liking this. It smells incredible. Might be worth it for the smell just alone. It's like the smell of a really chic boutique hotel. So that's my recommendation today for Ashley's Beauty Minute. Nothing to do with what we're talking about in today's podcast. But the other day I was thinking, I wish I had a platform to share some of these things I'm excited about. And I was like, oh, you can reach, dozens of people through your podcast. Why not give it a shot? Okay, so today I want to walk you through a team reading. We've talked about team readings several times on the podcast. I mentioned I've had the good fortune to do these readings for a couple of local Wichita teams, the Thread Women, as well as the Strategic Women's Group. You heard in several recent episodes from Vicky, Christy, and Jenna from that Strategic Women's Group. And we touched a bit on what some of the insights were that they gained from that team reading. So I thought it might be helpful to hear what that sounds like. Now, there are different options that you can do when you're looking at a team, to include not even getting into the nitty-gritty vocab of human design, keeping it more general. Just giving insight into the fact that we're all wired differently can be really powerful for people on a team to understand of, what motivates me or how I show up. It's different than the person sitting next to me. And we know this, but sometimes we forget, right? But the type of team reading that I'm going to walk you through today is specific when you're looking at a group of 3 to 5 people. And it's helpful in this particular reading if those who are participating in it have at least some idea of their own human design. So that may look like doing some one-on-one sessions before you meet as a team, or maybe it's, people that have found you through doing those sessions with you, but they have some understanding. So we're going to look at this specifically for a team, again, that is near and dear to my heart. And you may have spotted them if you're watching this on video, in past episodes over my shoulder. And that is going to be the Fab Four, the Beatles. So otherwise known as Paul, John, George, and Ringo. I If you're my age, so I'm 44, almost 45, when I was in high school, the Beatles anthology came out. And my parents were pretty big Beatles fans, so I knew about them, like the young, cute Hard Day's Night, the Beatles running around, screaming fans, all those things. But I really didn't know much about their history until I watched the Beatles anthology, which aired in 1995, late 1995. I was a freshman in high school, and it was an event. We sat down, we put it on, we used the VCR to record it so we could watch it again. And really from that moment on, I was kind of hooked. And I know it's incredibly cliche. What's your favorite band? The Beatles. But it really is true. I've listened to them now for 30 plus years, and I find myself through reading about them, podcasts, listening to their music, just discovering more and more about them as the years go on. And they've got a little place in my heart. So I thought it would be fun to look up their individual human designs and then use them as the subjects for this test reading. So just to talk a little bit about the kind of pre-work. So being able to kind of chat with, if you've got a leader of a team or even the individual team members, to find out a little bit more about your team that you're going to be sitting down with before you do this. I like to have some knowledge before I go in. So knowing like what are the roles, what do responsibilities look like day to day? What are some struggles? What are the strengths? Are there patterns that are kind of repeating and, maybe don't have resolution? Are there moments where it just seems to break down or fall apart? Communication may be a problem. And what does it look like, in a work week, in a work day, kind of getting some of that information. So I am going to imagine this with our Fab Four, that we would be sitting down, probably sometime maybe in the last couple years that the Beatles were together, when things started to fracture a bit. So probably late 60s, like 67, 68, something along those lines would be where this probably could be something that potentially could have an impact to just have a greater understanding of each other and strengths as a team, gaps, and ways to kind of address those. When I do this particular type of team reading, as I mentioned, it's helpful if the individuals have an understanding of their human design. So we would start with kind of the general talking about type, strategy, authority, and profile line, and kind of thinking about where there are similarities and where maybe there can be understanding of the differences to be able to have a little smoother communication and workflow here. So starting with type, so the energy piece, in this group of four, we've got two generators. So John and George are generators. Ringo is a projector, and Paul is a manifester. Now, when I ran Paul's chart, when you look on the internet, this is all, I did not get a chance to see birth certificates, but based on what the internet tells me as far as birth date, time, and place, Paul has some places listed a morning and sometimes an evening birth time. So when you don't know an exact birth time, you can kind of there's ways to still generate a chart. So I looked at a couple of different options, and Paul was coming up either as a projector or a manifester. And I just, never is human design prescriptive or predictive, but I just couldn't see Paul as a projector. Manifestor just felt like, if we're thinking about somebody who has the ability to kind of get the inspiration and make it happen, you look at Paul, he's still going strong in his 80s, and he's just had so many different iterations and so many different projects. And so many successes in these different fields. And it seems like he just really has a lot of inspiration that he's able to make happen pretty quickly. That rang truer for me. So just a side note there. So within this conversation about type with these four gentlemen, as we're sitting down, understanding that at this moment in their career, in their work as a group, they're feeling some pressure. There's some different avenues that people want to explore. You've got George, he's really like on the spiritual track. John, there's drugs coming in, there's different inspiration. They're kind of fully breaking away from that kind of Fab Four cutesy look. We've got Yoko coming into the picture. Probably need to look up Yoko's chart too, but we can have that conversation another time. And so just being able to kind of have that of like the communication breakdowns and the different motivations and how can we have a better understanding of each other and understanding that we're getting energy differently and we have different needs. So looking at John and George being generators, just reminding them in the group that, there needs to be a satisfaction. The being lit up is important. So being able to experiment, try different things, and to be able to say no. So we know our generators, if they're saying yes to everything, that's burnout city. So kind of having that realization that for John and George, it's important for them to be able to say no when they need to. Ringo, our sweet projector, this one made a lot of sense to me. I know, he's had some moments that he's talked about in his time with the group where he had to step away and the energy needed to be replenished and he wasn't feeling appreciated. It's a big hallmark for a projector to feel appreciated. So understanding for him and his type of projector, like being able to use his energy in those sustainable ways, and that the gifts that he's bringing in are to be able to kind of see the bigger picture, to see what others might miss, but just needing that support and that energy. So giving him space to have rest. And maybe, at this point where they had stopped touring, maybe that's been supportive for him. But within, the go, go, go that John and George may feel when they're lit up, knowing that Ringo may not always have that same energy. And then, of course, manifester. I would imagine at this point, I know that some of the other Beatles were a little annoyed with Paul. So knowing that he's a manifester and he has like this tremendous like inspiration, innovation that he's bringing in, when he's allowed to create on his own terms, might have provoked some eye rolls among the group. But that manifestors have, that not self-signature of anger when they're not given like the freedom to sort of be in charge and have autonomy, and that's where the creativity and the inspiration can come. But also there's some provocation that we know manifestors sometimes can be very misunderstood, to let him have that space. And maybe that's even a conversation. I know I've seen in interviews that the Beatles have done that they played with the idea of staying together as a group, but allowing each other to do side projects. And when I heard that and kind of knowing this piece of the human design, that might have been something that would have given them a little more sustainability as a group if they were allowed to kind of split out, do their own thing, and then come back. I mean, that would give Paul really that chance to have full autonomy and control that doesn't always happen in a group. And then understanding that strategy piece. So for John and George, they need things to respond to. So when they're having conversations about maybe the next album or what projects they want to pursue, giving them things to respond to, versus Ringo, he really is coming alive when he feels valued and seen and invited in. He may be a little more go with the flow. I think that's what I see in Ringo in his, interviews that I've seen and things that I've read over the years. But just being able to feel seen and invited, he can kind of go with the other's inspiration a little more easily. And then again, with Paul, with that freedom to initiate, to not have to ask permission. And then for him to understand that informed piece of like, if he can keep the others in the loop, it may just make things flow a little more smoothly. And then of the big three, the third one, the authority piece. So you've got George, he has the sacral, the trust your gut authority. John and Paul have the emotional authority. And then Ringo has that splenic authority, or that kind of intuitive nudge that he gets. So understanding with George, when you're asking him to make decisions, yes or no questions, don't give it to him open-ended. I've seen footage in that movie that came out a few years ago, the Get Back movie that came out a few years ago, of him getting really frustrated and just saying, just tell me what you want me to do. He kind of needs that direct, so then he can respond if it's yes or no, not what do you think? And then with John and Paul, having some space and that emotional authority to be able to ride some of those big emotions that may come up and come to clarity. And then Ringo as the splenic and the intuition, which is so quiet, sometimes giving him space to be alone, to kind of tune in to what feels right as far as where we're moving forward as a team. And then, I think it would be interesting, of course, depending on how deep I'm diving with the group, to be able to go into, definition, centers, some key channels. Those are all really good things. I think for the purpose of our conversation today, Just want to talk briefly about the profile lines. John, George, and Ringo have the line 2 in their profile. So giving them, again, space to do things their own way, need to feel appreciated for those innate gifts and talents, and just giving them space to be in their own flow. So again, when you're in this close-knit group that's doing all these things together, having some spaciousness might be supportive for those members especially. And then John and Paul both have the line 4. And that really stood out to me because line 4 is so much about collaboration and community and teamwork and famous, Lennon McCartney duo, songwriting duo, when they can leverage that ability to foster connection and collaboration, then their work really shines. So no shade to their solo careers, both incredible. But I think a lot of people would say, and I would tend to agree, that their collaborative work and their songwriting was some of their most exciting, if not the most exciting. They kind of gave each other that balance. And with that 4 piece, that sort of speaks to that. And then finally, our line 6. So this is George, Ringo, and Paul. So we've talked a lot about the line 6. You all know I love a line 6. It's that role model. It's those 3 phases, 0 to 30 experimentation, 30 to 50 years old is kind of integrating the wisdom learned in that experimentation phase. And then from 50 on, it's like you're on the roof or you're off the roof, you're going, it just gets better from there. And, George's life cut short. George was only 58 when he passed away. And I think you saw in his later life, in his solo work, like some of the ways that it really sort of took off towards the end with some collaborations he was doing and some of the different things he was exploring. And he's a great example of with the line 6, it just keeps getting better. It doesn't mean great things can't happen. I mean, he wrote Here Comes the Sun when he was, in his 20s. So obviously no slouch. But I think for him, I think with Ringo, same thing. Paul, it's like just continuing to rise and be looked at as this kind of figure, this role model within their musical careers and just in some of the other things, some of the philanthropic things they've done, acting, all these different pieces. So that would be kind of the first half of the team reading, is talking about that. Obviously, within those, there would be spaciousness for questions. So, when you're talking about the energy piece, where have you seen that? How does that resonate? What could that look like practically in the way you're working together? So all of these pieces, like, where is that being respected currently, and where is maybe that a sticking point? And what are some small, medium, big shifts you can make? And those conversations are going to happen within the reading, but the idea is then that it can continue on and just foster deeper communication. I talk a lot about how human design gives us language to not only understand ourselves, but also to support others in understanding our needs. And we get practical ways to bring it out into our relationships and our workplaces and our collaborations. So the second half, specifically when you're looking at a team reading for a group of 3 to 5, you get to look at something called the 12 Penta gates. So we know we all have our own individual gifts and challenges. But when you have that group specifically of 3 to 5, you can look at some specific gates and see if those gates are present or not within the team. And if even one person in the team has one of these gates, then the group has access to the gifts of these gates. And then if they're missing, those may be some gaps to be aware of. When we look at them as a group, they're going to have a different meaning and impact than when you look at them individually. Okay, because so sometimes you may be looking at something individually, like I have this gate, and you may hear it, but then when it comes to a team, it kind of reveals itself in a different way. So that's helpful to understand. It's natural skills. What it does here is, I think, helps teams to celebrate and recognize these things that may seem a little bit hard to grasp, of like, why does this go well? And then if there's things that maybe feel like they're missing, it kind of takes off the pressure of like something's wrong. It's just like, oh, it's how I'm wired, and gives you some practical ways to address those. So it's about natural strengths and then potential challenges that can be already present, but just again, giving that language to understand. And so I suppose you could say that ideally you would have all 12 of these gates present and you'd be firing on all cylinders. But I think realistically, that is rarely the case. And so again, it just gives okay, here are some things that may struggle, and are there additional people we can bring in or ways we can address those that might be more supportive of our work together? So starting off with the Fab Four, of the gates that they have that are present. And these first 6 gates that we're going to look at, so there's 12 total, the first 6 are going to be between the sacral and the identity center. And so I'm going to talk first about the gates that this group of 4 individuals has present and kind of talk about some of the strengths. And then we'll talk about some of the gaps. And then we'll go back and do the same for the other 6 gates. So the first 6 being between the sacral and identity center. So I'll pop those up, circle those so you can see. And these gates are really about thinking about the resources that you need, that you have access to. The vision of the team. How does it feel when we work together? Is it enjoyable? What direction are we moving in, and are we aligned there? What's the culture of our team? And how do we kind of feel about each other and kind of the way that we are maybe drawn to each other? So the first gate here is 15. We refer to this in this reading. So when we're looking specifically at these 12 pentagates with a team reading, we call this reliability. And this is present for both Paul and Ringo. But again, anyone has it, the whole team has access to it. And the theme here is holding the team together. And so it's about feeling connected to each other, collaborating, working together rather than kind of be siloed, and paying attention to when somebody seems out and trying to draw them back in. So I think you see this a lot again in that Get Back movie that came out, the documentary with all that old footage from when they were putting together the Let It Be album. Paul really trying to keep it together. Let's try this space. Now let's come here. And eventually getting to a place where the connection felt like it used to. The second gate here is gate 2, which is vision. And this is present for both Paul and John. And the theme here is establishing clear vision and direction. So I think even if you have just a peripheral understanding of the Beatles, seeing that Paul and John were the drivers, sometimes to everyone's love and excitement, and sometimes to everyone's dismay. But just having an intuitive sense of where they need to go next, seeing that bigger picture. So again, when this is present with anyone, it's present for all. Next one, gate 46, which is coordination. So that is present in John, Paul, and George. And this is a theme of harmony, feel good energy, ease and flow and collaboration, functioning as a unit, being able to sense when the vibe is off, and restoring harmony. So I think when the Beatles were at their best, at their most fun, this was really clicking for them. And then the last one that is present is gate 29. This is commitment. George has this. And the theme is inspiring purpose and commitment, a sense of shared purpose and meaning, helping people feel proud to be part of the group. And this really made me think of in the mid-60s, the group kind of had their foray into meditation, and they went to India and studied under a guru and kind of learned about some of those pieces. And George was kind of the driver of that. So I think a sense of giving them a deeper purpose that might be found in some of this spirituality, I think that jumped out to me as something that, maybe really was something that he brought specifically that the others couldn't. And then still staying with these gates between the sacral and identity center. So there are 2 here that no one in the group has. And the first is the gate 14, which is resources. And this can look like some cash flow challenges. Now, certainly, today, the Beatles and their family members, there's probably not a lot of cash flow challenges, but there's a whole great book that's really just about the Beatles and their money, that this was something that they struggled with early on as far as getting the right managers and having the right deals. And then also when they broke up and they had some, different managers and there were some things that happened, this came up again. So that made sense to me of even though again, the Beatles are rich times rich times rich now, that it did exist in their lore, in their history. And so with gaps specifically, when I work with a team, it's always nice to talk about, so what do you do? So in this case, I think the outside person is sort of like the big one. Another team member, a coach, an accountant, a contractor, a consultant, someone that can come in specifically to look at the money, the cash flow piece. And certainly there were different people that came in and out to do that. But that would be something that the team could kind of talk about and look at. And then looking at that person's chart, and do they have this gate 14, and are they going to be able to kind of provide that support for us? And then the second gate that is not present in any chart is the 5, which is the culture gate. And so this may lead to an absence of consistent rhythms and culture. So it looks like people doing their own thing with no coordination. It looks like an overarching feeling of disconnection or friction. So again, when we're talking about like 1968, 69, like that's the theme that kind of kept coming up for them, that it ultimately led to them breaking up, was kind of that disconnection. And so having a chance to have this conversation before the breakup, saying, how can you make the rhythms of your workflow more predictable so that everyone can kind of commit to the norms and build that culture of, we know what is understood of us when we come in. We know what our particular role and strength is. And so again, it can be just among themselves, really having those norms, but also maybe like a consultant coming in can be helpful here. And again, looking for somebody with that gate 5 to support in this specifically. So at this point, each team member, as we're going through this, is going to have a note catcher. They're going to be able to write down the things that stand out to them, their reflections. And at this point, probably after the strengths, I would pause and say, what stands out to you? What rings true? What do you have questions on? And then the same for the gaps, and giving them a little bit of space to start that initial conversation of, oh, that makes sense. That's what I've experienced in the team readings that I've done, is that people say, that makes sense. And again, it's taking the pressure off and saying, there's nothing wrong. It's just a natural gap when you come together. And how can you fill that gap? And maybe sometimes it says, we've worked it out. We've figured it out. Yes, we recognize that is a gap in our, team culture, but we've figured out how to meet it. So, all right. And then the next 6 gates in these Penta gates are going to be between the identity and throat center. So I'll throw that visual up there. And some of the questions and things to think about with these gates are thinking about future planning, executing on those future plans. How do we get what we're selling into people's hands? I think the Beatles, they nailed that one. Are we reaching the people we want to reach? Are we tracking the metrics that matter? Do we have the right oversight to make sure things don't fall through the cracks? And so the first gate here, so again, starting with the gates that are present, some of those strengths that may exist. So the first is gate 8. And in this team setting, it's looked at as a marketing and PR gate. So Ringo, Paul, and John all have this. The theme here is bringing a broader visibility and attention to the work. So certainly the Beatles started in these small clubs and just grew to obviously worldwide phenomenon, still are today. So knowing how to make it exciting so that people care, and spotting cultural shifts are a couple things that stood out to me here. I think the Beatles started very much looking one way and ended the decade looking completely different, as far as from the 60s to the start of the 70s. And they were always tuned in with what was going on in the culture and really driving culture. The next gate here is the 31, the administration, and all 4 of the Beatles have this gate present. So this is about organization, systems, and follow through. So having processes, keeping people organized and clear, having clear roles. If things are getting chaotic, being able to bring structure back. And I would say that I think this is an interesting one to think about with that one we talked about a minute ago, which is a gap, which is the culture, is that the difference between those. So having systems, but then making sure that those systems are working and fostering a culture, so they've got kind of half of it, they can do the systems, but maybe the culture piece of why is missing. And I also think some of the recreational activities that the Beatles were engaging in might be, playing here, as far as some of the recreational drugs and just the 60s, man. So who wants to be real stickler for organization and systems? So they have it, but was it totally being followed through? I don't know. So it's an interesting reflection on, you can have a strength, but it doesn't always, translate, depending on some of these other influences. We're not immune to the conditioning and the realities of our world and our life. The next gate here that's present is the 13, which is accounting, and Paul has that. So again, this is kind of pricing structures, keeping an eye on financial health. And it was interesting to me to think about this when the Beatles finally did break up. John, George, and Ringo went with one manager and Paul went with another. And his basically it was his distrust of this other manager who ended up being like a pretty shady guy, Alan Klein. So Paul kind of had that eye on the financial health that maybe the others didn't see when they kind of broke from that. And then the last gate here between that identity and throat is 33, which is oversight. And so again, this is just in Paul, but quality control. So what's working, what's not, what problems are brewing. Again, kind of when we think about that split there, I feel like there was a acknowledgement of something's brewing and what do we do about it? And Paul was kind of, you could see him kind of trying, like again, in that documentary, you see him trying to fix it and the others are not interested. So having this conversation before it reaches its breaking point to be able to say, this could be something that comes up, and giving the group a chance to reflect on, what isn't working right now, and are things falling through the cracks, and what are mistakes that we can be learning from, I think could be supportive in some of that. And then the gaps between the identity and throat center, so the gates that are not present in any of the team members, the first would be gate 1, so implementation and sales. And this would be one that I would say absolutely they had figured this out, which is getting their products into people's hands. And I think that's just by virtue of having a team. I didn't look up the chart of every team member, their manager, their producer, some of their business associates. But my guess would be that with the team, they figured this out. With the label, right? The record label is here to do that. But if it were just the 4 of them trying to start out and get their, stuff into people's hands, this might be a place where you say, like, it would be good to have some kind of consultant, or just really think about what your sales processes are, and you have really clear ideas about how you want to do that. And then the last gate here that is not present is 7, which is the planning gate. And this is something that may come up as just feeling stuck doing the same thing over and over. Reactive behavior versus proactive behavior, and a feeling of like stagnation. And I think this is something I've heard in interviews with the Beatles, post Beatles, of like, it just felt like it was the same old thing. And I think that's always one that I look at and I'm like, how could it? It was so exciting. But to be able to walk away from the biggest group in the world and say, that's enough, that time period was enough and we're ready to do our own thing. To me, this gate really speaks to that feeling of, it just feels like routine. It feels rote. It doesn't feel exciting anymore. And if we look at the type, going back to generators, they need to be lit up. Manifestors, they need to feel like they can be creative. I think this kind of goes hand in hand with that feeling of dissatisfaction if it feels really, really routine. And so if the team were looking to kind of, what do we do? Outside voice. So again, I keep talking about that documentary Get Back, but it's just, there's so many things there of like, they brought in Billy Preston to perform with them. In the Beatles anthology, they talk about how it just got them all on their better behavior to bring in an outside voice. So it worked for a while at least. And so at this point, after talking about the gaps, again, we would give a time of reflection of the strengths. Where do you see that? How does that ring true? What questions do you have? And then the gaps, some initial time to think about, maybe is there someone else we want to bring in? Is there something we can do here to kind of address these things if we're feeling them? Or we don't really recognize that and we think we've figured it out. And so to close our reflection on this team reading, just talking a little bit about, if this is something that you thought might be helpful for your team. Again, there's different types of human design team readings you can do. This is one example for a small team, or maybe it's a larger team, but a lot of times within a larger team, there are still smaller teams within it. This could be something beneficial, but why does this work? So the first part, looking at type, strategy, authority, the profile, possibly some of those other pieces of each individual chart, again, gives understanding of the different ways that you're wired, and empathy and compassion to work better and try to not work against people's natural flow, right? But how do we work within that? And then when we talk about the Penta gate, so kind of the second half of the reading, looking at those gates that are present and those gifts that come up, like, again, giving language to things that a lot of people probably are already feeling of, like, when we come together, we just have these natural gifts. And it can be really validating and very team building and very, like, unifying, of why we are drawn to each other, of why we gravitate to certain responsibilities within our team, and really how to leverage that. And then again, with the gaps, even though we're talking about maybe some challenges, the benefits here are we can just stop wasting time blaming ourselves. Like, why can't we get that right? Oh, because it's just not something that's occurring naturally. So that makes sense. So the relief that can come from that, and then just being able to stop wasting energy of kind of beating your head against the wall and just saying, let's bring somebody else in, or let's set up these systems and structures that can help us to succeed, and then go to making those conscious strategic decisions of who to hire, how to work around it, and things maybe that, we're not really feeling that gap right now. So we'll be aware of it for the future. We're going to note it. But for right now, it's working. So I think being able to have this in a team, I have seen it be incredibly powerful, and, excited to hopefully get out and share this with more teams in the future. Call me. All right. So that was our Fab 4 team reading. So another new thing we're trying. I'm going to close each episode, at least for the foreseeable future, with 3 things that are lighting me up right now. So putting a button on our episode today. First one, girl dinner. So not just girl dinner, which we love a girl dinner, like Caesar salad, fries. But I got to go this last week. There were actually 2 girl dinners in Wichita. One was on the west side on Ridge Road. There's a new-ish place. It's an espresso champagne bar. I'm going to butcher it, but it's like Vivre, if you're going to pronounce it with a butchered accent, but cute little place. So they were doing a drive for pet food donations, and they had really cute little pop-ups. So they had the Caesar salad, they had the charcuterie, you could order champagne or coffee. They had people there doing Botox. I personally don't partake in that, but if you did, what a cool thing to get $10 Botox, permanent jewelry, tiny tattoos. Love it all. And it was just so cool to just be in that space for a good cause and just be with some other women. And then my friend and I hopped over to Larcher's. They were doing their second one of these girl dinners. They had a DJ. They had kind of a fixed menu. Same thing, Caesar salad, fries. But I tried. You guys, I really don't like beets, and I'm bummed out about it every time I try a new form of beet, and I'm like, "Duh, I want to like those because they just are so pretty, and I feel like I should like them, and they're good for you." But they have that dirt taste to them. I had a beet dish. It was so delicious. It was like beet and citrus and some, I think it was like some whipped ricotta. Oh my gosh, this thing was so good. But again, it was just so cool to just see all women together having fun. Good music, great food, great conversation. It was such an uplifting little evening to do. I hope we see more of those in the future. Second thing lighting me up right now. My friend Cynthia, who I talked about on my last episode, we're doing by the time this comes out, we will have done it, but our first session experience on one of the centers. So we're starting with the Open Will Center, Open and Defined. We're going to do one for each center. But Cynthia is opening up her brick and mortar location for her business, Inner Oasis. It's going to be in the former Jenny Dawn Cellars space, RIP. I loved Jenny Dawn Cellars. But she's going to it's essentially a wellness studio. So yes, yoga, yes, Reiki, yes, sound bath, but also, red light therapy and lots of other wonderful things, delicious things, as Cynthia would say. So we'll put the link for that so you can check that out, but that's coming this fall. So really excited about that. And then the third thing lighting me up right now, summer vegetables. We've got our first cucumbers and tomatoes coming in, and those things are so good. So I am just eating all the cucumbers right now. Tomatoes are just almost there. We had jalapeno. That was delicious. I made a really good summer corn salad the other day with some of our jalapeno. Love it. What more could you ask for? All right. Well, thanks for hanging in with me, trying some new things. Hope this was a fun one. I had fun talking about 4 of my fave guys. And we will see you next time. Take care.